Politics, and we are super excited to be here at the Backwards River Festival for a special edition of our show with UIC's Freshwater Lab. I'm your host, Ricardo Gamboa, or Ricardo Gamboa, or as I'm known throughout the South Side, the radical Selena. Like the singer, not Gomez, the other singer. Today we are here and kicking off this morning with a special panel and conversation on waste entitled Trash is Treasure, Waste as a Valuable Resource. And joining me are some visionaries coming all the way from the Caribbean and here in Chicago. So if I was a good host, I would introduce them myself, but I'm lazy. So I'm gonna let them go ahead and introduce themselves, their names, pronouns, what organization or an enterprise they are repping, and what is their work. Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. And kick us off, Bethany.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Bethany Barbouti.
Make sure we're talking really nice.
Okay. Hello? Oh, that's better. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Bethany Barbouti. I am co-owner and co-founder of Eco and the Flamingo, which is Chicago's first zero waste store. And what that means is that we're a store that provides refillable options for your everyday household goods and like dry food items. Your laundry soap, your dish soap, hand soap, shampoo, isopropyl alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, pretty much anything you can think of, plus your flours, sugars, dried beans. We also have olive oil and things like that. You can bring in your own containers, clean and dry, and refill them. So you're not buying more containers, you're using what you already have. And that's a little bit about me. I have my master's in sustainable food systems, and I spent a little over 2 years in Iraq working on agricultural reconstruction after conflict. And that's me.
Let's give it up for Bethany. Cool. Next in line, we got...
So, good day, everyone. My name is Dorlan Curtis. I am from the Bahamas. I'm repping the Cape Eleuthera Institute, which is in Eleuthera, as well as Food Post Farms. So right now, I am the Assistant Director for Research and Innovation at the Cape Eleuthera Institute, and that focuses, or our area of focus is on conservation, and that is in the area of marine conservation as well as sustainable development. So a lot of my work there focuses on like waste management practices, so recycling, teaching, principles of zero waste, as well as like processing waste either through incineration or through recycling or even composting. So most of the work that I do there, utilizes like paper, a lot of compostable waste, and turning that into food. At Food Post Farms, which is where I'm the co-owner, a lot of our work and the things that we do there is practicing a closed loop system of food. So we do help a lot of farmers, a lot of people in the community to divert their food waste and green waste to our farm. And that allows us to then compost that and then use that to grow vegetables. We have a huge issue with food security in the Bahamas, but that is our way of essentially, helping to show and display sustainable development. But that's a lot of the work that I do. We'll kind of get into that. And pronouns, he and him. So yeah.
Thanks so much. Let's give it up for Dorlan. And last but certainly not least, we have Rosa. Come on, Rosa. Break it down. Introduce yourself.
Buen día a todos. Good day to everyone. Thank you to Laura and Ricardo for putting together this panel and inviting me, an intergenerational panel. And one way that you can tell is because my peers have phones and I have paper. Right? But nevertheless, we have common interest and commitment here today. My name is Rosa Cabrera, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm with the Rafael Cintrón Ortiz Latino Cultural Center at UIC as a director, and also I consider myself to be a cultural worker. And my background is in the visual arts and cultural anthropology. So the way that I have been able to bring these two areas together is by, through the work of museums and cultural center, scrutinizing how environmental and climate change problems are social problems as well, right? And the way that we have been able to engage not only students, but the community and the public at large is through the arts and the humanities. So, using a lot of art tools and also storytelling to really learn from community, first voice their experiences, and also the all the positive practices that they are doing to resolve both the environmental and social issues affecting their communities. Let's see, I'm a first generation college graduate and a 1.5 immigrant who came from Cuba just with my mother a long time ago. So I call Chicago home. Thank you.
Let's give it up for Rosa. So when me and Laura were kind of thinking about panels built around this festival for the Chicago River, one of the things that I threw out there was we need a panel on waste. Because I think you cannot talk about water right now at this point without talking about waste. And I said that without even really knowing what that means, because it's such a big word, and that it's like thrown around. But there's so much particularities and a universe of possibility within it. And so I guess I want to start off by just asking, this is for everyone. What is waste? What is the historical de-evolution that's led us to become such a wasteful society? Is there a point in history when waste became trash, and how is even the concept of trash inherently using Eurocentric? And I don't have to answer all of that, but those are just some general questions that I'm throwing out there to get the conversation started. And feel free to anyone chime in, give and take.
Okay, I guess I'll start. So what is waste? It is a very broad definition, but if we look at what we consider waste, it's as simple as anything that we considered unwanted material or refuse or garbage, or things that in our mindset we can't use. Waste, when we think about waste as well, it's also then further classifying is this waste solid waste? Is this municipal waste or industrial waste? So just thinking about that is what I usually teach my students is waste is just something that's unwanted or things that's like refuse, and then we break that down further into classifying this waste is considered green waste or food waste or municipal or industrial waste, because that also helps to then determine how those kinds of waste are going to be treated, or looking at how they're generated as well, and they're not created equally. So yeah.
So I want to kind of just get some clarification. So when you say green waste, what makes something green waste?
So what we would consider green waste, things like when you cut the grass, or if you're weeding, or brush from the trees, those would be considered green waste, or any kind of biomass, which would be any living plant material, and that can also sometimes include livestock manures.
Food waste is when I am eating my sandwich, but I don't want the crust, so I leave it there and then I throw it away, or the peach pits, any of that stuff, right? And then municipal and industrial waste. Can you explain that a little bit really quick, just so for our audience?
Yeah. So food waste would be if you're prepping food, you're cutting up onions or tomatoes, and the discards of that would be considered food waste. And then municipal and industrial waste. Food waste can be considered municipal waste because it's coming from a municipality or a city, but that is, we lump in things like chemicals or debris or any appliances or any solid materials like plastics or paper. Those would be considered municipal waste. And then industrial waste can be things when there's construction and demolition, or if, the city is doing a project, or if you're doing projects at your home. Those things would be considered industrial waste or things from industries. So yeah.
And then Bethany or Rosa, anything that you guys would like to add or kind of help us understand waste and how we understand waste?
Go ahead, Rosa.
No, I totally agree with Dorlan's description. The thing that I will add to that, more coming from the social science, is that it's also for us to consider the narrative of waste as humans also, right? And what I mean by that is, we can think of terms of waste in terms of how certain populations and their cultural practices, right, and values are considered to be waste, to not be something that is valuable and nourished. So that's just a little bit of pushing us to think of waste in a whole different area as well.
Can you give us an example of that?
So later on I'm going to be touching. So for example, we know that a lot of populations that are immigrant populations, indigenous people, people of low income have a lot of good environmental friendly practices, right? They do it because in a lot of ways, they either bring this from their home country, but also out of necessity, and yet they are not valued, right? They are not valued in society at all. Those practices are looked at, in the same category, in my opinion, as something that should not be kept, that should be not incorporated into American society.
Do you have anything to add?
I would say I'm not sure if this is quite like the answer to the Eurocentric concept, but something along those lines is the fact that particularly Western countries are selling their garbage to other countries, which is very problematic, as we've seen in the U.S. as now China won't buy our garbage anymore or accept our garbage anymore, and we're dealing with landfills filling up faster and faster. There are issues of European countries illegally selling or dumping their trash in other countries such as Turkey, and then they're having to deal with the ways to manage that. And I can only imagine that there are a lot of other dumping sites that aren't necessarily so spoken about, but I think it's the responsibility of highly wealthy nations to be working out solutions as to what to do with our own trash and what to do with the trash that we export, as opposed to putting that burden on other countries that have bigger problems to be worrying about.
And so I think one of the things that I want to kind of dive into now as we kind of think about trash is I think it's really hard to kind of even right now you saying other countries are selling their trash, right, to China, right? But I think one of the things I'm thinking about is how we really don't even understand when we're talking about waste, how that actually impacts us, and to be able to conceptualize that. So can you give, can any of you all, this is a question for everyone, give us some facts and raw numbers about the shit that we discard, and how many, anything from how many tons of trash are accumulated in Chicago, or globally, or just any kind of figures that help us conceptualize and understand the impacts of waste.
I would say going back to thinking about how we've become a wasteful society. I think we have just become very consumer driven, and that's okay, but I think a lot of the responsibility of us being wasteful is also on the manufacturers and people that do produce these goods that we do consume. And we are becoming wasteful because our lifestyles have changed. We either are no longer growing our own foods close to where they're being consumed, as well as a lot of places they import, and so inherently that waste is then generated. And so that's kind of how I think we have over the years become a very wasteful society. And this is speaking from experience in the Bahamas, where we were more of an agrarian subsistence based society. Waste was a necessary problem, and now we see that. But in terms of raw numbers, I'm in charge of helping to audit our waste at our school every month, and roughly I would say on a per volume basis, most of our waste is actually plastics and cardboard. I would say about 60% of our waste by volume is just single-use plastics, and that can be in the form of plastics 125, milk jugs.
their actions are ineffective or have little impact because it's really corporations that are creating all the waste. So like, but your store is advocating for us to actually make those individual choices. So can you tell, what is your how do you straddle that type of binaric, dichotomic, I'm going to think of another big word that just means opposite or oppositional that polarization that is thrown up in discourse right now?
That's an excellent question. So there's two.
I'm very smart. I come up with great questions. You guys, I am coming alive. I am so hungover. It was my boyfriend's surprise 40th birthday party, and I got engaged last night. But I just had this coffee, this Topo Chico, and one of these vegan tacos, and it was kind of spicy. So now it's just like rubbing off in my ancestral veins. It's my ancestral spice that's kicking in. All right, so wait, back to this question. Let's do this.
Okay. So there's.
No games, Bethany. I want the truth.
Here we go.
Okay, let's go.
It's a twofold answer for a twofold question. There is a ton of responsibility that needs to be put on the head of corporations. Absolutely. What's the best way to get a corporation's attention? Spend your money somewhere else.
Right.
And spend your money doing something differently. So I think that even though it's unfair that the individual consumer has to take on responsibility for that, I think until we start voting with our dollars and spending our money on things which are being done in a more sustainable and efficient way, the corporations aren't going to pay attention. I mean, either by law or by, hitting them in their bottom line. And we all know that in terms of affecting law, they have a lot more lobbying power than the rest of us. So, a lot of people are working really hard on policy change, but it's very slow going because all the corporations then are fighting back to oppose those changes. So voting with your dollar and growing a movement in that way is really the best way to get their attention, I think, first of all. And second of all, there are no massive corporations that will supply us in the way that we want. For them, it's, us little zero waste stores and natural food stores and stuff are just a drop in the bucket. So we're then supporting small makers, and the more you support a small maker, the reason why a lot of times these kind of small makers are more expensive is because they don't have the what's called the economy of scale. They don't have the volume to bring down the prices. So the more that we're supporting these small, eco-friendly, closed loop manufacturers, the more that they're going to be able to grow and the more that they're going to be able to bring their prices down, which means that it's going to have a wider reach in terms of people's socioeconomic status. So we're kind of trying to start a process. There's some other zero waste stores that are going to be opening up in Chicago this year and next year.
Copycats.
Yeah, but we love it.
Are you fuck this? Don't copy off of
No.
Okay, sorry. It's like a good movement.
We try to advise as much as we can. We get a lot of people calling us
oh, aren't you guys just so nice?
We try.
So collaborative.
We try.
I have an idea for you. So I vote with my dollars, and I spend all my money on alcohol. So I think that Nico and the Flamingo should come up with just big bins of just tequila, rum, vodka, and I would be there, and we'd be saving a lot of glass bottles.
I think that is actually you're not the first person to suggest that.
Oh wow! What are you're saying? I'm unoriginal.
No.
Thanks, Bethany. Thank you.
No, I'm saying that you're sharing a like mind with a lot of people.
Oh, I'm in good company.
You are.
I'm gonna add something else. You could take this or leave it. I have a genius idea: recyclable condoms. I don't know what it means, but I know people like to get freaky, and I think there's a market for it. Take that somewhere. Speaking of taking things somewhere, Dorlan, I think one of the things that I think a lot about with the U.S., and I think Bethany touched on it, is the way kind of the first world countries kind of use the third world countries as kind of as a dumping ground themselves, or we could say the global north uses the global south as a kind of dumping grounds. And I think one of the things that I'm thinking about, right, is how can you share what some of the consequences of the U.S.'s relationship and waste practices have had on the consequences of the U.S. Girl, maybe I'm not. Maybe that hangover is still kicking. Okay, so can you share, Dorlan? I'm gonna start over.
Yeah.
Dorlan, can you share the way the U.S.'s waste practices affect the Bahamas, a country in the Caribbean in which you are from?
So it's
Thank you.
interesting because in the academic circle, I also chuckle at the amount of ways that they use the language of like the global north, the global south to like, politically.
I haven't finished my dissertation, so don't call me an academic.
Well, I'm just saying, like, it's interesting because, they throw around these terms like global north, global south. And then small island developing states is like these kind of, I would call whistleblower words about, dog whistle words of just racism in these countries. But in thinking
I am
about,
very racist.
in thinking about the U.S.'s relationship, we in the Caribbean basin, we're predominantly like net importers, right? And so the culture of disposability in the U.S. directly affects us. When we think about the marine debris that washes on our shores, like a lot of times, like when we do a lot of beach surveys, the materials that we do find, like we're not producing this in the Bahamas. Like where is this coming from? The disposability, like we find a lot of debris, like plastic containers, shoes, all kinds of things just washing on the shore. And that is not things that we are producing, but things that the U.S. or other countries around the world are producing, and that really plays a negative toll on us because environmentally, that impacts a lot of the beaches and the coastlines. Also due to the direct consequence because we don't always have the luxury of like voting with our dollars in the Bahamas because we can't say, okay, we'll just go and buy it from someplace else. It's like, no, that's the only place you're going to buy this stuff from. So we are kind of stuck in this dilemma where we still have to import in order to like survive. But what we're doing in terms of just trying to shift our culture, especially in the global south or the third world or small island developing states, whatever you want to call it, a lot of people...
I'll take all. I'll call them all those things.
Yeah, all of the above. But our government right now, like in January 2020, we had a plastic ban, and that is like kind of a step in the right direction where we've actually banned the use of single-use plastics. So we're no longer able to import like styrofoam containers or like polystyrene utensils. A lot of like plastic materials we weren't allowed to import or sell. And so we had to switch as a country to like paper-based materials or like compostable materials. And that has been, a lot of Bahamians were like fighting like, what the hell you tell me I can't like sell like a styrofoam container. But in the long run, it kind of really helped because, these materials end up in a landfill and a dump. And once they are burned, like that kind of impacts the public health there. But we've kind of made a conscious effort to like reduce that by banning that completely. And I think that's really helped. And then I look at a lot of examples about around the world, like how people are taking trash and then utilizing that to either make furniture or like building materials. These are ways that, we don't have, at least in the Bahamas, we don't have a lot of ways to process waste. So we have to come or be creative in the ways that we are handling or at least taking or making use of what is at our disposal due to importation or things that kind of literally wash on the shores.
I got an idea for you, fancy pants. What if we make lingerie out of food waste, and that way people can like eat it up when they're getting like nasty? Just think about it. Think about it in that little farm.
I'll think, yeah.
Just messing around. So, Rosa, let's pick up on this thread of kind of these like more like Western colonial thought processes and the way they affect waste practices in museums and spaces within academia. What can you tell us about the ways in which these institutions think about and contribute to environmental injustices, specifically surrounding waste?
Sure, yeah. So many mainstream museums and universities are certainly leading the way in conservation when it comes to LEED Gold buildings, right? Certification, LEED Gold certifications. Their buildings are becoming more green. They are conserving energy. They are conserving water. They are even, doing landscapes that are promoting native plants, right? But this is only part of the equation. What I think they're still having a hard time doing, alongside with many of our higher education places is that they are not considering the social justice part of all of that, right? And so, for example, one of the things that you're seeing more happening now is museums getting unionized, right? Which is pretty amazing because they have a history of paying their, labor in museums. And it's another cheap form of labor unless you are up in the hierarchy of administration. So I think that when we look at both, especially the mainstream museums and our higher education institution, you're seeing this kind of leadership that is more based on the buildings, but not so much on let's mesh this together with what this means as far as social and cultural sustainability as well. So, at UIC, for example, is a place where again, they have a lot of the legal certification, but when it comes to intertwine that with the sustainability of diverse practices of social justice, that's happening in silos. And a good example is, this festival today is run by the Freshwater Lab, which is one of those leading organizations within UIC. And there are a few others like, the Heritage Garden, the Latino Cultural Center, but it's not embedded in the commitment of the institution towards environmental and climate justice. So, this is something that it is very problematic. It's very problematic because we are not going to be able to resolve the environmental and climate crisis unless we bring together the social issues affecting communities as well, right? What does it mean when people, labor, are getting not even minimum wage to work on all these, pollutant places? That's a really good example of that, right? What happened when in communities when still people living there are afraid to leave the house because ISIS might come from them, right? And still, they are the ones in, the frontline communities. They are the ones, are farmers who are picking up the food. So, I think this is, for me, the hard work is how do we ensure that the work that we're doing, no matter in what part, whether it's waste, whether it's other form of environmental issues, brings together all these things together, the environmental and the social injustices.
So I think, Bethany, your work is self-described as sustainable, reusable, cruelty-free. Can you define what that truly means in practice? Meaning, can you walk us through the ways in which some of our waste ends up on your shelf?
Sure. So that would be mainly encompassing the first two, sustainable and reusable. So the waste ends up on our shelf not too much. We do have some artists that reuse waste and trash in their art, and that ends up on our walls and sometimes in jewelry. But reusable is a big one. So we have a container donation program, so people can clean out their containers and donate them, and then anyone who comes in that didn't bring their own containers can then choose from there. So we have always a huge stash of free containers that people can take and refill. So that's one way that it does end up. We don't sell them, we just give them, but it's how it does end up in the store. And let's see, so that's sustainable. So sustainable, it's actually quite a lot of research that goes into how we select all of our products. So everything from where they come from, is everyone making fair wages along the entire supply chain? How is it packaged? How does it reach us? All of these kind of things, we absolutely prioritize things which are made in Chicago, or we like to say regionally. We have a lot that comes from Missouri as well. But we do have a number of products that come from the South Side, and if anyone knows of any eco-friendly or sustainable manufacturers, makers, we're absolutely always open to working with more local workers from all over the city. So so that's a big part of closing the loop, is something that's very necessary for our business. Places that So, for example, we get our liquid laundry detergent from a manufacturer on the south side, and we fill up these big containers, and then people fill up their containers from those containers, and when they're empty, we bring them back. They refill them for us, and we bring them back to the store. So kind of closing that loop, so there's nothing that gets thrown away is a really big part of the store. And then cruelty-free basically means that any of the products within our store that do have an animal component, that anything made with beeswax, or we have some like body brushes and stuff, those are made from horse hair because they cut the horse's hair, they don't kill the horse, things like that. So we don't have a ton of products that have animal components to them, but the ones that do are they don't cause any harm or death or a poor life for the animal.
I mean, I think one of the things I'm interested in too, right, is like, are there any statistics you have, like off the top of your head, that can share with us about how moving towards a zero waste society is essential for our long-term survival?
Sure. So I think the 18-year one that I brought up earlier, the fact that our landfills are about to be in less than 2 decades completely full, is a big one. I think the one that probably people are pretty familiar with is a statistic that was making the round on the news, that we eat about a credit card's worth of plastic from our food every week. So we're ingesting that, and you know, plastics are made mostly from petrochemicals, so that's probably not very good for us.
Sometimes it's tasty. I've ate a credit card before, but I really haven't. So, Dorlan, so I think one of the things that got me really excited, even just like in our friendship, and like with just even your work in the Bahamas at the school that you where you teach and conduct research at, and the way it's centered on issues of the environment. And part of that is even just because of the way I was introduced to these issues from the freshwater lab. Can you share with us a bit about the school, what happens there, and what are some of how does your work shifting the narrative around waste?
Yeah, so a little bit of the school. So, at the Cape Eleuthera Institute, we are a research institute that, we still do, still provide education. So on one side of our, institution, we focus a lot on marine conservation. So doing work with, sustainable fisheries. Two of the main fisheries we have there in the Bahamas are conch and lobsters. And so we do research on how do we conserve those fishery stock for future generations. We do a lot of work as well with research in crabs as well as sharks, a lot of turtle ecology. So that's one component of the work that we do, and also looking at how waste does affect those ecosystems. On the side that I kind of do a lot of work on, most of that is focusing on waste management and repurposing or upcycling materials to higher value items. So one of the projects we're currently working on is utilizing cardboard as a substrate for growing mushrooms. We probably produce about 400 pounds of cardboard waste every month at our school, and that's quite a lot when you think about volume as well as just the sheer poundage. And so we convert that as a substrate to grow mushrooms, and then that can also help to then feed our dining hall. We feed about 200 people every day, and so that's a lot of mouths to feed, but we're also importing a lot of food as well as a lot of cardboard inevitably. But that's kind of a lot of the work that we do, is focusing on my side in terms of upcycling waste into valuable products. We also, as a school, we do collect quite a lot of cans and plastic, and we do sell that to the open market. During COVID, that was a huge issue because, places weren't accepting plastic, but that is one of the revenue streams that we do have. And then we do produce biodiesel on campus, so then that obviously helps us to then divert that particular waste stream from the landfill or from the dumps. One of the issues we do have in the Bahamas is the waste in the landfills. A lot of our landfills, they go unregulated, and in terms of the connection to the water, most of those contaminants, they do infiltrate the water table and they end up in our aquifers. So we do pump quite a lot of fresh water from the ground, but a lot of that contamination from the landfill actually infiltrates. We're made of limestone, so let's just say we have a dump site at this site. Most of those contaminants they're basically, you can find them and you can track them like 10, 20 feet in the ground. So a lot of the work that we focus on is, teaching and trying to reduce as much waste from going to the landfills. And that is really, a huge help to our survival. And that has been tracked a lot to some of the health issues that we do currently face in the Bahamas.
I guess one of the questions that I have is, Rosa mentioned how so much of this work ends up, when it's in kind of these research institutions or things like that, ends up kind of being siloed in those institutions. I know both at your farm and at the island school, you guys bring in students and there's like young people. What are other ways that your work gets out of the institution and into the communities?
Yeah, so
like, are they eating those mushrooms, tripping off of them? Like,
no. So we're actually producing like just edible mushrooms, so like oysters, which you can find in most stores. Or, but in terms of how that work is getting out, so every Friday, like at our farm, we host this thing called Green Fridays, and so we allow the students to come. They help to turn the compost piles. We've also helped them to set up a waste management system. So they have a 3-bin system on their campus where they have a bin for aluminum cans, for like general waste, and then compost. And that is being used as a community model on Harbor Island, so they can, see how this single stream of waste is actually affecting not only the built environment, but also the health. So every week we kind of teach them the elements of composting. We allow them to come and like bring their food waste, and then they're able to actually produce compost. And we send it to their school every semester, and then they're allowed to then grow food in their gardens. So most of the work that we are doing, even though it is kind of on a very small scale, it is trying to help the Bahamas to at least model what sustainable communities can look like, with something as simple as just having a waste sorting and recycling program. And so right now we're sending out surveys to kind of get data on the amount of waste that's being generated in our communities. One of the issues that we have in tackling our systems of waste is that there is no data. Like, you ask like the waste companies, what's the poundage that we produce every month? They're like, 2 dumpsters, but in terms of quantifying what that is that's like one of the blind spots that we have in managing our waste, is that there's just no data there. And what we're doing with these school children is going through these communities, conducting waste audits on households, and then we're then collating that data to then give a report on the amount of waste that the Harbor Island community does produce every month. And so that can then effectively help us to then engage on ways of either reducing our waste or thinking of technologies or processes that we can then use to treat the amount of waste that we do generate in our community.
I think you get more people to come if like you were to have like that Friday be a happy hour.
I mean, sure.
I want you to take that, marinate on it, do what you will.
Yeah.
Speaking of happy, my grandmother, Rosa, she like never wasted a coffee can. Like, those Folger coffee cans, like they would just turn into like flower pots like all over the house. And it was like, and I'm thinking about that because I'm thinking like, sorry, Bethany, she beat you to it. Kind of recycling and reusing these kind of like, it was like a cultural practice, I feel like. And as a Latino, how do you bring the practices of the Latinx or Latinx, as I like to call it because it sounds gayer, community into your spaces of work? And what can our cultural practices teach us about how to think differently about waste? And let's start there, and then I might have 1 or 2 follow-up questions, like a quiz.
Sure. So also, how many times did you open your grandma's refrigerator and you couldn't figure out what was what because there were 10 or 20 different kinds of margarine, right?
Yes.
Plastic containers.
Yeah, that country crock, right. it was like a surprise. Like every time I was like, is this gonna be butter or is it gonna be mole?
Exactly. Right.
So true.
Yeah. So that's a really, interesting practice that we see a lot. Like I said before, among immigrant communities, right? And so. Between 2009 and 2011, when I was working at the Film Museum, we conducted a study in 9 Chicago neighborhoods. And this was for the city of Chicago to help them figure out, understand better what the environmental friendly practices and attitude of people in those neighborhoods were in order to get them involved in the Chicago Climate Action Plan. And so I did work in Pilsen, and a lot of residents there reported a lot of this environmental practice, like your grandma. For example, having gardens in their backyard, um, hanging clothes on their backyard so that they were not using dryers. Interesting things like, at nighttime we open our windows so that we don't have to put a fan. Some people did not have an air conditioning, but they didn't want to pay more energy, so they were opening their windows at nighttime. Walking a lot instead of taking cars. Also, carpooling. Carpooling is a huge thing. But what is interesting about that is that they also talked about how with time, many of these practices were left behind, right? Like, for example, you move from one neighborhood to another, and sitting in your front porch is not something that might be looked upon as a good thing, right? Or having your windows open, or having clothes hanging on your backside. Those are signs of, you don't have a dryer in your house. So, and this is all tied to this idea of, American way of life, where, the idea is that economically you're supposed to, go up, and you're supposed to have all these nice things, and obviously you're supposed to be wasting more, right? This is all part of the American mentality. And so, that was really, telling to hear them saying that. So what we have done at the Latino Cultural Centers is use those kinds of practices as an asset-based approach, in which then we incite the students to think about how older generations, older generations have done this in their household, and how they might be able to take on some of those environmental friendly practices. However, I have to go back to something that Bethany touched upon, is that we also have to be very careful that we don't put that kind of responsibility on the individual, as if we do all these environmental practices, the climate crisis is going to be solved. No, because that's only a small part of the equation. It really resides on the corporations, right? The people making, the wealthy, right? At the end of the day, the wealth is dumping all of their waste on poor communities. And so I think we also have to, at the same time that we elevate these practices and we acknowledge them, we also have to say, this cannot be put to each of us to resolve this. This is really have to come from the wealth that people are accumulating, and how they're doing that on the back of working people.
It's really interesting, because I hadn't even thought about it until you said it, how so much of the idea of success or the U.S. good life is tied to on one end consumption, right? That with your wealth you can do more, you can have more, you can travel, right? So like all these, and then you can accumulate more things. And then part of that is also the idea of the U.S. good life being tied to this notion of convenience, that everything kind of having everything kind of being related to the notion of convenience that usually requires more energy, it makes things more wasteful. I'm going to be marinating on that, because I think I'm going to write an article for Medium that no one's going to read based on this. So, Bethany, what can your store teach us about reusing and recycling, and what are some ways in which industry can make these products more affordable to non-white or non-wit? I started calling white people wits. I don't know why. I just think it's fun. Non-wit communities, and how does your company commit to this work?
Excellent. So I think the biggest thing that you can learn at our store about recycling is actually to refuse and repurpose before you recycle. So anytime that you have something exactly like your grandma and my grandma, reusing.
My grandma did it first.
I'm sure. Not because you're older than me.
Oh wow! Wow! I look amazing. I just want to say that. This dimple chin doesn't age.
But repurposing what you have as much as you can, or finding a new home for it. I think something in general that everyone needs to learn, especially, I think, Rosa, what you said about the kind of American mentality of kind of throwing things away is something that we really need to focus on and work on. So when you take something into your life, you're now responsible for it, which means you're responsible for what happens to it when you don't want it anymore. And finding something, a proper way to give it to someone else or reuse it or dispose of it in a proper way is a really big thing. I think in terms of non-WIT communities, we're really, really happy because currently our customer base is extremely diverse, both in like ethnicity and in age. So we have everything from like 16-year-olds to folks in their 80s and 90s that come into the store, and people from all ethnicities and walks of life. So that's something really great. However, in terms of like socioeconomic status, there is kind of that barrier because it becomes this balance of if you pay people properly to acquire your goods, they by nature are going to become more expensive, and then it's a systematic problem of why are people not being paid enough, probably because they're being underpaid for producing things. So then when you pay them properly, the cost of the goods goes up. However, there's still a whole bunch of people that are not being paid properly, and they therefore can't afford the goods made by people who are paid properly. So it's kind of this cycle. So I think it's about supporting companies that do the right thing and pay fair wages and care about sustainability, and growing them to where they can bring their prices down, as well as advocating for people across the board to be paid properly. So we are very, very careful in general about our margins, and we try to offer everything as low as we possibly can, considering our own survival and fair wages and all that. So I think our big commitment is to not price gouging, to buying from the local community, educating people, encouraging people to use up what they have, and to really consider what do you use on a daily basis. I think when I kind of started this journey of like minimizing, it's like a buzzword now, but minimizing and being a lot more conscious about my waste, I ended up throwing 10 shampoo bottles and half-used lotions and all this old makeup and stuff away that I didn't use or used only half of it and it's gone bad. So I think just really considering what you use before you buy is also really helpful in terms of kind of adjusting for the higher cost of things that are made well and people are being paid.
I have a question. How much did it cost to start your store?
So our initial startup cost was about $25,000.
Really?
Yeah, but that was because we started very, very, very small.
Okay.
So we took some loans and we put in what little savings that we had, and then every month, we didn't pay ourselves for a really long time also, so we reinvested every bit of our profit and revenue into expanding the options of the store. So within 6 months of opening, we actually moved next door to a larger space, which was really incredible. But so the initial startup of having just soaps and some other products, I can show you some photos of, it was real tiny, was 25.
I'm gonna start one of these stores, and I'm gonna reach out to you to figure out how.
Please do. Actually, there's we want to do collaborating and stuff, especially in a lot of different communities. So.
But I'm gonna change. I'm not gonna take that name, Eco and the Flamingo.
Okay.
It's gonna be Eco and the Homo, because I am one and I love it.
Cool.
So you guys, what I love about and I want to congratulate you all, you three, for the work that you do, but also because you have managed to achieve what happens every time I listen to a panel or conversation about the environment and climate crisis, which has depressed me and make me feel that there is no hope. So how about we try and switch it up here, and you guys, and let's try and close with some hope. Can you all chime in with some practical resources to support our reduction of waste that people can apply, or even can kind of contest, even the dominant institutions and things like that surround us that contribute to waste? First one that doesn't wins in my mind.
I would say, just coming from a research perspective, one thing I always encourage people or students to do is something as simple as doing a waste audit. I think it's really important to know your habits in terms of what you're generating, to kind of understand what is the baseline of the problem. And that could be something as simple as, every week or for a week or two, I'm going to separate my food waste, plastics, or whatever materials into categories, and then at the end of the week, like actually analyze, like, okay, I threw away 20 pounds of food waste in this week. What the hell does that mean? And if that continues for a while, you need to reassess your behaviors of, like, maybe I don't need to buy 20 pounds of potatoes a week if they're going to go bad at the end of the week. So I think it's first understanding
Salad greens. The amount of salad greens that goes hold in my fridge by those little containers, that is like a lot.
Yeah, so I think it's just understanding the data. Also too, I think one thing is important is what is principles of going zero waste, so being a zero waste. So as Bethany alluded to, things I teach my students are like rethinking, refusing, reducing, reusing, recycling, and then rotting, which is just composting. I think those are like some key things. It's just first implementing those small changes. I mean, it can be as simple as bringing a water bottle to an event or to work, and I think that can then help to move the dial in terms of just changes. I always try to tell people, especially in the Bahamas, reduce your consumption, but for us in the Bahamas, like, we have a lot of milk jugs in our waste stream, but we're not producing any dairy products in the Bahamas, so it's very hypocritical for me to tell someone, just go down the street to a dairy or to a farm and get a glass jug. But if that is not built into the infrastructure, you can't expect people to do that. So I think it's just these small changes by auditing, understanding the principles of zero waste, and then looking at maybe ways as a community to, like, putting these changes, whether that's like, I'm going to start composting or maybe utilizing a service for that, which is, I think, is most practical for people living in the city. Yeah.
Thank you. Rosa, what do you think?
Yeah, I think for us, at UIC is supporting and elevating the good practices, right? That people are already doing, not only the students but their families, and trying to highlight that kind of like intergenerational learning that can be very positive. One of the things that the holidays are coming up, so there is going to be a lot of shit out there, right? Waste, right? So, and this is a critical time in all of our life with the pandemic. So I think this is a really good time. I know that, I already committed that I am not buying, probably not of much this coming holiday. And something really interesting, I've been having a lot of conversation with younger people in my family, trying to make them think through all the stress that we have in our life. A lot of the time is due because we own so much, and therefore we have to work more, right? But it's this cycle of unhappiness, right? A lot of the time, because there is so much stress in working. So how do we simplify our life and get to a point where we minimize debts, right? And embedded in that is we have to consume less, right? We have to live with less. Yeah. I do want to share something that it might make you a little more sadder.
Yes, bring it to me. I'm an Aquarius.
I'm going to throw it out there because I think for me it keeps me focused. This morning I read that they have identified 120,000 what they call forever chemical sites in the United States. And what that means is that these sites cannot be cleaned. They are so polluted and there is no way they can be cleaned. The question is, are they going to cap it? What are they going to do? Many of those sites reside around Chicago because they reside mostly, where industry has lived for many years, right? So if we think in those terms, like, if we already have 120,000 forever chemical sites, are we going to keep down that road? Are we going to continue, right? Because a lot of these sites, you're talking about landfills, and you're talking about, all the chemicals that come out of the production of all the stuff that we consume, right? So
I mean, what are our choices?
I don't know, Rosa. Thanks. You really did make it sadder. I'm just going to go run into the middle of Archer right now. Give her a round of applause. Follow me. Bethany, how about you? A little bit of hope. Especially after Rosa's great little bomb that she just dropped right over there.
I think there's a lot of hope in the community, farmers markets. Combining that with what Dorian was saying, I mean, go to the farmers market and bring your own bags, and then you're supporting local. You're not taking more plastic into your home. So little things like that. I mean, creating more stores like ours. I think creating more access for people to not have to purchase the waste, because I think a lot of people, if given like proximity to being able to refill their items, a lot of people would, but it's not super convenient to drag your laundry stuff, all your stuff halfway across the town.
And I like farmers markets. When I go, I feel so at peace. I'm like, I think I'm white sometimes. I'm like, what? I'm like, is this what it feels like? Like, you know what I mean?
Oh, and I think also, like, in the farmers markets are doing a really good job. A lot of them now, like, accept, like, WIC and Link and stuff like that, which I think is amazing. So yeah, so support local. Local is sustainable. It's give back to your own community. I think that's probably the biggest hope, is to have a hub where everyone is acting locally as opposed to trying to make everything so global and so national all the time.
So take it, people. Think local, act local, reduce, reuse, refuse, rethink, repurpose, let it rot. Don't roll around in one of the 124,000 forever chemical sites, and we might have a chance of staving off climate genocide. Thank you so much for coming to this panel. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you, Rosa Cabrera. Thank you, Dorlan Curtis. Thank you, Bethany. What's your last name, Bethany?
Barbouti.
That's a good one. Bethany Barbouti. I like the alliteration on that. That would be my drag name. Bethany Barbouti. That would be my drag name. Let's give it up for Bethany, Dorlan, and Rosa. I encourage everyone to come and speak to them. I know people from panels love it when they're like bombarded and then like people are asking them questions. It's great. And we will be back here in 15 minutes with another conversation about reimagining our relationship to the Chicago River. So please come back. In the meantime, grab a drink, get a kayak, canoe, whatever you want. And thank you so much for coming out and sticking around.
Thank you.
Give it up.
Thank you.